Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. In tonight's programme we shall be discussing the disgraceful decision that many members of UEFA are seeking to ban Israel from European football and ultimately the World Cup in USA 2026 if Israel qualifies. This alarming move follows the United Nations' recent declaration that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, as the UN is seeking to impose boycotts on Israel competing in international sports. According to a report published by the Daily Telegraph on Thursday the 25th of September, most members of UEFA's executive committee support suspending the Israel Football Association's and its clubs. The Trump administration has notified UEFA and FIFA that it will intervene to prevent Israel from being excluded from next year's World Cup if they qualify. Are we entering a new era and where sport, especially football, is being used as another weapon against the world's only Jewish state, which only reeks of anti-Semitism? And I'm joined today by Pastor Tim Gutman and Pastor Reagan King. Reagan, firstly, this programme, we all of us share a passion and love for Israel and a passion and love for football as well. So we're all Arsenal fans, England fans, and also Israel fans as well.
There's a lot of unity around this table.
Massive lot of unity.
Yeah,
and
right.
It could also be, we're doing a kind of our own Behind the Headlines sports programme. But share your initial thoughts on how UEFA members are trying to be influenced by the UN to actually boycott Israel from playing in the Champions League or the Europa League. And also potentially that if Israel qualifies for next summer's World Cup in the USA, that they could then find themselves being banned from playing in that competition, which is the elite competition in world football.
There's a lot of pressure, and the pressure is coming from multiple angles and multiple sides and with different motives. You have definitely within most international football teams a growing presence of Muslim players as well, who, because it's been said, it's accurate. I know Tim Diep, who we've often had, has commented that Islam is institutionally and ideologically anti-Semitic, right? So that's a reality of its teaching. That being the case, while not every Muslim player is going to be anti-Semitic necessarily, the vast majority are going to hold anti-Semitic views, which of course leads to being anti-Israel. And so these national teams are kind of experiencing tension within. They're thinking, well, we're getting pressure. Some of our players, you have people, incredible football players like Mo Salah, who are very actively opposed to Israel. You know, we're Arsenal fans, but we have to have the conversation about Ozil, our former player. And there's others. At the moment, it's interesting because Arsenal has had players who have been very outspoken in support for Israel and has actually sacked people who have made anti-Israel comments from their staff. So there's a lot of tension in sport at the moment, but the pressure is coming from people, legends of the game, Eric Cantona, people like that. Gary Lineker has been verbose in his anti-Israel sentiment. And with Sir Keir Starmer's recognition of a Palestinian state, this shouldn't come as any surprise. This was going to happen because now people are able to leapfrog on that and say, oh, well, if Israel continues to act like this doesn't exist, they should be banned because after all, Russia was banned, which, by the way, I didn't exactly agree with. The treatment of Russian athletes and Russian sports teams. I think on doping issues, you could make the case, but in relation to individual athletes banned from playing tennis for a full year, it didn't make sense.
They're allowed now, aren't they?
They are now.
But the other issue is to do with the federations as well. And
correct.
These federations, aren't they, Tim, are coming under huge pressure from nations such as Spain, such as the Republic of Ireland, and also the kind of French football authorities as well, to kick Israel out of the World Cup if they qualify, but they haven't qualified since Mexico 1970, so there isn't a high expectation that Israel will actually reach next summer's World Cup finals. But also the other fact is, well, we're seeing as well that huge amounts of money is being pumped into UEFA from Qatar, who hosted the last World Cup in 2022. We know the appalling human rights abuses that Qatar has committed, their support for Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood, and yet they are able to influence Muslim federations, and they are the ones that are trying to get Israel banned. And after all, Israel was attacked on October the 7th. Unlike Russia's invasion in the Ukraine, Israel acted in self-defense of her people after the horrors of October the 7th. But as a football nation that Israel is, share with us the shock that Israelis must be facing now that UEFA members are trying to seek Israel from playing international football.
Well, these are terrible days. I mean, in our generation, it's never been this bad. Not just anti-Israel, anti-Semitism. And, recently we had, didn't we? It was last week, I think it was. They all boycotted Netanyahu's speech, this virtue signalling, self-congratulatory with their cameras out, walking out of his speech. And you've got nations recognizing Palestine, including our own. And, a lot of people are playing internal politics and using Israel as a scapegoat. And the UN, of course, is anti-Semitic at its core. Again, we've got all of these Arab and Muslim nations putting pressure on the UN. And we have all of these agendas. And yet, so many people have highlighted, what genocide? What are you talking about? And here we have Israel being singled out, scapegoated. And in sport, I mean, bringing Russia, I mean, it's not like Ukraine invaded Russia, committed the most heinous pogrom.
That's on that side, yeah.
Murdered and kidnapped their women and children, and they're using this always an equivalence between Israel and Hamas. I mean, these are dark, dark days, and I think as Christians, we need to be aware of this and put our voice into this.
No, absolutely. So just give you a kind of run through for tonight's programme. These are the topics that we're going to be discussing. So Daily Telegraph reports that Israel could be banned from European football as early as this week, in a move that they may also lead to bring them about being thrown out of the World Cup next summer. Telegraph Sport has been told that the majority of the UEFA Executive Committee members are in favour of suspending the Israel Football Association and its clubs, and talks are planned with FIFA over the coming days to do the same. The move could see that Israel could be stopped from playing any further World Cup qualifiers have emerged, amongst warnings from the Trump administration that it would be a wrong move to actually isolate and trying to ban the Jewish national team from competing in the World Cup if they qualify. Sadly, we see that Manchester United legend Eric Cantona has joined those calling for Israel to be thrown out of world football as he made his speech at the recent concert at Wembley Arena titled Together for Palestine. And then we see that the UN and European football federations have forgotten the pogrom that was committed against the Israeli supporters of Maccabi Tel Aviv in Amsterdam last November in what was distressful and shocking scenes. And again, we're seeing that boycotts are emerging to boycott Israel. And sadly, we're seeing that football now is being used as another weapon to hurt the one and only Jewish state, which reeks of Jew hatred. Tim, would you like to read out the poignant scripture that we have for today's programme?
Such a key scripture. It says in Zechariah 2 verse 8, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, he sent me after glory to the nations that plunder you. For he who touches you touches the apple of your eye."
Yeah, and the reality of our world at the moment, we're seeing it in every arena, on every side, socioeconomically, politically, just in relation to the global confederation of nations coming against Israel. But it doesn't end in a good place for the nations, right? The reality is the Lord is the defender of his people. He is going to keep his promises. This isn't about looking at the spiritual condition of Israel as such, as many people will pipe up and say, yeah, but what about its spiritual condition? There's all of those issues that can be addressed and should be in a different context and setting. But the reality is the Lord always has had a plan and purpose for Israel, regardless of their spiritual condition, right? His plan and his purpose is to establish and to fulfill his forever covenant, which included an actual specific land mass. And so in this relation, you know, we're talking also, we can have that conversation about moral objectivity, the reality that there is no moral equivalence between Hamas and Israel and its actions. We've lost sight of justice and just war. And I think a lot of it is, maybe you have some feedback on that, down to just our social media influencer-driven age where everything has to be very much like candy floss. And if someone does something heinous, you know, let's kind of skirt around it, or let's try and explain it. We're in a day, aren't we not, where bad is being portrayed as, well, it's not really objectively bad, it's just misunderstood.
Well, I think also, I mean, the scriptures I think is so important, because it said, he who touches the apple of Israel's eye touches God's eye. And so therefore there's that repercussion that those nations that want to target Israel, and of course we're seeing a massive European nations lined up against Israel, probably backed up by Qatari funding and influence, and also from the hard left and the globalists, realizing that they're not coming against an ordinary state, they're coming against God's nation and his people. And so there'll be heavy consequences. But as we're recording this program, we have to acknowledge that UEFA have come out now and said that Israel won't be banned from playing international football nor competing in European football club competitions. And I think this is purely down to the pressure and the influence of the Trump administration. Again, what we're seeing is essentially a God's sovereignty at play, that he's placed President Trump and his administration in power for such a time as this, and they're calling on what God's called them to do, and that's to protect the nation of Israel. But Tim, share with us your kind of thoughts and reflections on the Israeli football team, and how really that football should be kept out of politics.
Absolutely. I mean, this is sport. These are individuals who are representing their country with pride, young players, and they're being singled out. They're being singled out unfairly, obviously, as we believe. But mixing the sport and the politics, and mixing as well, you know, music. A lot of people are trying to ban Israel from the Eurovision Song Contest and other things. And, you know, it's going back to the scripture, if I may, when it talks about Israel being the apple of God's eye. You know, I've said before, and I explained it to the kids like this, when you're messing with Israel like these nations are, I mean, it's not just that history testifies that those nations and empires that touch Israel are affected by God, but it's like poking God in the eye. You know, they are, and I think it's Isaiah 40 or 41, he says, I will take away the reproach, and this is coming, you know, we know this is coming, I will take away the reproach of the nations from you, because you are precious and you are honoured in my sight, which it makes me emotional, because so much disdain and hate, and it's so satanic, you know, it's that dragon of Revelation 12. And it's all of this hate that Israel faces, their young players, the guys that have answered the call bravely to the IDF because they have hostages and because Israel was attacked heinously in this pogrom. And there's so much hate and disdain in the world, but I believe that the time is coming. The veil will be lifted from the nations. And there's this scripture in Isaiah as well. We talk about the veil a lot of Israel, but the veil will be lifted from the nations, and they will be honoured in God's sight, but also honoured by the Gentile nations, who will say, one day the time is coming, they'll take a Jew by the hem of the robe and say, we know that God is with you, you know?
Absolutely, and that's at the Feast of Tabernacles.
What's happening is that a lot of these nations are inadvertently increasing the likelihood of Israel having a clear path to qualification. Yeah. If they just get on and play the game, if they just get on with it, you know, it might be that Israel wouldn't qualify. Like you said, they've not exactly been the gold standard of football.
The last World Cup was Mexico 1970.
Yeah,
I wasn't even, none of us were born there.
They're a much better
so
team now.
Yeah,
but they're not the gold standard of football. You know, when over there, I always do enjoy. Israelis love football. They love talking about football. Yeah. I'll ask locals. I went to this Mizrahi guy there, and he recognized I was from London somehow. Not exactly a full London accent, but he was like, "Oh, you're from London," and we started talking. And
the Israelis can guess your accent. That's
it's very strange. There's a strange element to it, but we started talking, and if I recall correctly, he's a big Liverpool fan. unfortunately. And so he was just expressing just all about, Premier League. And I said, what about local? Look, and he had zero interest. This is a man born and raised. He's in his 50s. He had zero interest. Kind of could talk a little bit about Beitar or something like that. But he said, it's just not. It's not any good here with the football. So Israelis love quality football, and to see how this has definitely caused hurt in the Jewish community, not only in Israel, but here as well, because it's like, well, hold on, where are we welcome? What space are we welcome in?
Exactly.
Yep.
Sport is meant to be this thing where people, regardless, come on, we have North Korea, North Korea in the World Cup. Right?
Come on.
Let's talk about this.
Well,
China.
and the Islamic Republic of Iran, let's not forget those
Qatar
guys
last
as well.
time. What's going on?
I mean, I've got some very happy memories. I mean, I've seen quite a few of the Israeli teams play in the Champions League. I'm going to go through a list now.
Go on.
I watched, it was Maccabi Haifa playing the Champions League against Manchester United back in 2002. That score was 5-2 to United, so that's the first time I was at Old Trafford. Then I watched Liverpool play Maccabi Tel Aviv at Anfield. Liverpool won 2-1 in that Champions League qualifier, and which Liverpool got to the final of the Champions League that year, only to lose to AC Milan. Also seen Wales play Israel back in 2016 for the crucial European qualifier, which Wales went on to, which was a 0-0 draw. And the only time, it was quite funny actually, because the Welsh fans love to sing the Bread of Heaven.
That's it.
At the stadium. But they didn't realise really that the Bible is orientated in Israel. So when you play Bread of Heaven, the Israeli team started playing better in that that's the irony
of it.
But the special occasion was actually seeing Israel play England in 2000 and this would have been in 2007 to qualify for the Euros of 2008, and I actually had an England shirt on. I was welcomed with my Israeli friends in the Israeli stadium. Many of the Israeli fans were wearing Liverpool shirts and Man United shirts. Didn't see that many Arsenal shirts, sadly, but they had a few. But they were happy to have me have an England shirt and stuff as well. And that was quite experience. And then going to actually see the game, the return match at Wembley, where England won 3-0. So I still got the programme look of that match day.
Steven Gerrard
on the front.
Fantastic.
So it's 5 p.m. Saturday, the 8th of September 2007, Wembley Stadium, England versus Israel. So I've got some very fond memories of particularly watching Israeli teams, national teams, as well as the club teams. And that's why I think as these nations try to boycott Israel, that we should do more to actually go out and actually watch these games in support of the Israeli teams who are feeling isolated, lonely. But also the protection of Israeli fans now in Europe. Why isn't, for example, UEFA dealing with this pogroms and this anger and this hatred being directed against Israeli fans from playing in Europe? It's disgusting.
Well, what happened last year in Amsterdam, of course, Ajax actually has a rich Jewish heritage, loads of Jewish fans. It's some even consider it a Jewish club. And, it, unfortunately, at the aftermath of the match, there were some individuals who began to literally hunt Jews. They used that expression, let's go hunting for Jews. And they were going through the streets in Amsterdam assaulting. There were some people who went missing, some were hospitalized, all sorts of nonsense and madness. They won't even, they won't even allow their basketball teams, for instance, they have some basketball teams.
Very good basketball teams.
Very good basketball teams. I've had the joy of watching Maccabi Tel Aviv and Hapoel Tel Aviv play our London team, London Lions, a couple years back, and met the present owner of Hapoel Tel Aviv on that occasion. The Israeli fans were incredible. Absolutely brought a different level of energy to that place that no one knew what was going on, and it was not surprising that Hapoel won the game in the end, just the very last minute. So, but now when they come over, they play to an empty arena because they won't provide them security.
And it's crazy because this, for example, in the pogrom in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
Ajax. I mean, that's obviously evoking memories of the recent Holocaust, and you'd think that, I mean, a lot of the guys in the Netherlands were saying we're so ashamed. This is, this is very shameful, and they were saying the right things, but still, the security, the protection for Israeli fans, and you guys have mentioned you've been to Israel matches and you've been to that basketball match. The Israeli fans, which I can see and know, are amazing fans, yeah, and they're very welcoming. You sat amongst them, and there's just a very great atmosphere. But for the fans not to be safe and the fans to be singled out as well, this is evoking memories of when it was unsafe for Jews to be on the streets. This is, these are the days we're living in.
No, absolutely. So going back to what happened on the eve of Kristallnacht, the massacre against Jewish people by the Nazis in November of 1938, was a major worry and concern again for the Netherlands and also for the city of Amsterdam, as a reflection that Israeli football fans weren't safe. So we have now this CBN news item to go to from last November, where it talks about this hideous Palestinian mob who were actually seeking Israelis, asking foreigners for their passports to ensure that they weren't Israelis, and even Israelis were being hunted down at their hotels, and it took Israel to put on a special flight to bring the Israeli supporters of Maccabi Tel Aviv home after a night of horrific violence.
Israeli soccer fans in Amsterdam to watch a game were violently attacked and threatened by a giant mob of Muslim immigrants armed with knives and clubs as they left the event. The Israeli government is sending flights to rescue Israelis who are said to be hiding in their hotels after the brutal attacks. Israeli media and social media exploded with coverage and outrage about the attacks, which are being called a pogrom, an organized massacre of an ethnic group like the Nazis carried out against the Jews in the 1930s. Thursday's attack happened just days before the 86th anniversary of Kristallnacht, when the Nazis launched multiple pogroms against Jews. Prime Minister Netanyahu says he views with utmost gravity the planned anti-Semitic attack against Israeli citizens and requested that security be increased for the Dutch Jewish community. He spoke with the Dutch Prime Minister, who posted on X, calling the attack completely unacceptable anti-Semitic attacks on Israelis. Some media reports say there were signs of tension even before the attack. The Times of Israel reports video on social media showed Israelis chanting against Arabs and Palestinians in the city, apparently before the violence, and that pro-Palestinian anti-Israeli activists claimed the Israeli fans were the first to harass and engage in violence. Newly appointed Foreign Minister Gideon Saar is traveling to the Netherlands to handle the crisis. Deputy Foreign Minister Sharon Haskell says many are hospitalized.
I call on the Dutch government to arrest and prosecute all those involved, and we have information from social media leading to those radical Islamists who went hunting for Jews.
She challenged Europe to take action.
I call on Europe and the world to act more aggressively to combat anti-Semitism. This is your responsibility. Israeli Jews being attacked by a violent mob in the heart of Europe is something no one should stand. If we fail to act, it will only get worse.
And the National Security Council issued a new warning to Israelis and Jews in the Netherlands to avoid movements in the street and lock yourself in hotel rooms. The externalization of Israeli and Jewish symbols must be avoided. The latest violence has once again focused Israeli fears on the rising tide of international anti-Semitism. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
And thank you to our friends at CBN for that report, and highlighting the horrific events in Amsterdam and the pogrom that happened there. Turning our attention now to the World Cup that's coming up. In 2022, FIFA allowed Qatar to go ahead, and also Iran was also allowed to play, despite that crackdown on their young women. So we're seeing this double standard. So with the World Cup coming up, obviously a very prestigious. Why is it Israel? Why was there no attention on Qatar and all of the guys that were killed or died building those stadiums and all the things that were going on there? And also Iran was allowed to play as well.
Oh no, it's disgusting. But what I think I loved about that particular game, because it was England's opening qualifying game against the Islamic Republic of Iran, and many of the players from Iran were in solidarity with the people being pressed by the regime after the horrific murder of Mahsa Amini. And they showed solidarity and support, and they refused to sing the Iranian national anthem. That took incredible brave and courage. But I mean, Reagan, the World Cup is the pinnacle, I think, of all major sporting events that are put on around the world. I think the World Cup is actually bigger than the Olympics, and I certainly prefer the World Cup than watching the Olympics.
I think it's the most watched sporting event around the world.
And the prestige of it as well, and especially that if Israel can actually qualify, because currently they are joint second. I think Italy is just above them on the same number of points, but they've scored more goals in their Group I qualifying games, so they're doing incredibly well. They've been involved in some very exciting games, and they could get to the playoffs, and if they're in the playoffs, they stand a good chance of potentially qualifying. Share with us what you think it will mean for Israel and the Israelis to actually qualify for the America 2026 World Cup that's hosted by the United States, Canada and Mexico.
Well, it being the most prestigious sporting event in the world, I think it would be something that would be earth-shaking, really, for a lot of people in Israel. Just a bit of a bright spark in the midst of conflict and pain and difficulty. You know, it's unfathomable to most Israelis as to how these nations, which we've already mentioned, that have legitimate history of atrocities, are able to compete, and no one bats an eyelid. North Korea, look what happened to its players who abysmally failed a few years ago, were thrashed out of the park in 2010 by Portugal. A lot of those guys ended up either not going back to North Korea because they knew what awaited them. At least one or two became refugees, and then others went back and went into concentration camps. North Korea still gets to compete. You know, so all of that is a concern, and Israelis are like, sorry, hold on, but we didn't choose this. What do you want us to do? We still have 48 hostages, maybe 18 of whom are still alive. And you want us to just, what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to deal with this? You know, the jacked up figures, a lot of it, there's upset, there's anger with the UN. The UN saying that Israel is committing a genocide, which of course the US administration has completely condemned. There are many other nations that have condemned their...
It's a new blood libel.
Yeah, exactly, 100%.
But let's have a look now at this trailer that advertises the World Cup 2026, which will take place in the United States, Canada and Mexico. We know that England already have one foot in this tournament next summer, and praying that Israel would also make it as well. So let's see what we can expect from World Cup 2026.
Get ready. Champions of the world! For the greatest event in history. In 2026, we will bring the world together. 3 countries, 16 cities, 48 teams, 104 games. All of us, united as individuals, united as billions. So you and all of you, bring your game to the beautiful game. We are FIFA. We are football. New song, Somos. We are 26.
Well, and anyone who loves sport can see the drama and the emotion and can already get excited about it, and that's sort of what it means as well to Israeli fans. But on Thursday, the 25th of September, some legitimate worry in the Jewish community in the UK as well, many of whom kind of have dual allegiances and whatnot, would have been deeply concerned by this report that UEFA could ban Israel this very week in this move to trigger World Cup banishment. Now, of course, the World Cup is operated by FIFA, but UEFA is responsible for facilitating the European qualifying legs of things. And so it would ultimately be down to FIFA to make the decision, but if UEFA banned, the pressure would fully be on FIFA at that point.
Absolutely. I mean, this proposal was by UEFA members to ban Israel from the World Cup qualifying games in Europe, which means they couldn't compete. Israeli club teams such as Maccabi Haifa, Maccabi Tel Aviv, Hapoel Tel Aviv couldn't compete in European competitions, which means that essentially then if that happened, then it would put the whole qualifying groups in disarray, particularly Group I, which Italy and Norway are involved. But also means that Israel wouldn't actually then be able to have the ability to compete for next summer's World Cup, which is horrific. And also
isolating them further.
I mean, also with this one as well, we're seeing that the Telegraph Sport has been told that the majority of UEFA Executive Committee members are in favour of suspending the Israel Football Associations and its clubs, that talks are planned with FIFA over the coming days to do the same. So we see that, for example, that Israel could be stopped from any further World Cup qualifiers if it wasn't particularly much for the Trump administration. But essentially what we're seeing, aren't we, Tim, is that the nations are raging. The nations are in a rage against Israel. We're having this blood libel constantly pumped through our mainstream media in this country and across Europe and in the UN, our own government's announcing it, that Israel is deliberately carrying out policies of genocide. Thankfully, they stopped the whole argument that Israel's committing starvation of the Gazans by preventing international aid. That seems to have gone away from the summer. But again, it does that incredible damage and harm to the Israelis. And of course, the Israelis are passionate about football. And now we're seeing huge pressure from the federations of UEFA, particularly the Spanish and also the Irish, to try and ban Israel from competing at international football.
And football is, I mean, we've spoken a lot about the trauma that Israelis the Jewish community worldwide have gone through since October the 7th, such trauma. And we know as Englishmen who support England that how much healing a Football World Cup doing well could be, especially if it will be the first World Cup for most Israelis, since 1970, what's that, 56 years? First World Cup, if they get through, and it would, and doing well in a World Cup brings the nation together. It brings some healing. It brings some, some positive,
national pride as well.
National pride, a chance to fly the flag. Like we are in England, we get the flags out, and everyone's like, glued to the TV. And Israelis, as you know, are passionate football fans, and they love their country, and they've gone through so much trauma. To deny them that. As you said, to deny them that because of this dark blood libel, because of this satanic deception, slander, lies, because of the nations raging, deny them that those nations that are behind this, those nations that are pushing this agenda, those nations are poking God in the eye. With that, going back to the scripture, they are poking God in the eye. And God, and I've always said this, God deals with individuals. You have the gospel, and he judges us by our obedience to the gospel. Amen. And how we follow Jesus. But he deals with nations as well. And if Israel is the apple of his eye, maybe he looks at nations through how they treat Israel, and that's how how a nation is judged, and how a nation is judged on their obedience to God and to the word of God.
Absolutely. And Reagan, just unpack your thoughts really on how the Norwegian national team actually wanted to donate entire profits of the game when Norway play Israel to be given to Gaza's humanitarian aid effort, knowing that aid will most likely end up in the hands of Hamas or other Islamist terrorist organizations. And it's only really the Americans, the Israelis, are actually giving the aid to the residents of Gaza that they need. But again, it's showing this hatred and this contempt for Israel that we're seeing, particularly amongst European nations.
It's taking a side with terror.
That's right.
It's taking a side with Hamas. They are saying, we are with you, Hamas. And they can't say, no, we're not, we're for the people of Gaza. They can't say that because everything is going, where this will go is to Hamas. It's very interesting that, unless they, let's say, give unexpectedly to the GFH, the Gaza food hubs that are being overseen by Israel and the US, this will almost certainly go to institutions and organizations that will probably sap 70% of it in their administrative costs and whatnot, and then the rest of it will find its hands in, if not Hamas, one of the other many terror factions that are vying for control in Gaza. And people don't understand the situation at all. And we know that they don't understand the situation at all because the calls to ban Israel have predated October the 7th.
That's right.
And Tim, do you kind of share with us your thoughts on how the international community, particularly European nations in particular, make this argument of like, we banned Russia from competing in the World Cup, particularly in Qatar 2022, and from international football and international sport because they invaded the Ukraine. And there seems to be wanting to make that moral comparison between Russia's actions and that of Israel's actions. And yet what Israel did on October the 7th was in line with international law, because Israel as a nation state has the right to defend her citizens and protect her citizens. And the world has forgotten, particularly as we're approaching the eve of the second anniversary of the horrors of October the 7th, the absolute massacre and slaughter of innocents that Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad committed on that evil day known as Black Sabbath back on the 7th of October 2023. And that doesn't seem to come into their thinking or even into their narrative.
There's so much disinformation, there's so much that just isn't logical or sensical, comparing Israel to Russia. As like we said earlier, Ukraine did not commit a heinous pogrom on the Russians. Didn't kill 10,000s of them and kidnap, pound for pound. It's like, you should see what America would do if let's say Mexico did what Hamas did to Americans. Mexico wouldn't stand. Israel has been so restrained. They get accused of genocide when they're trying to move the populations to protect human life. They've let in enough aid. Do people realize this? I think for every person in Gaza to have 3,000 calories a day. In fact, it was last Friday, I think 400 truckfuls of aid. The problem is in Israel, Israel's doing more than any other country, I believe, would do to a nation governed by a terrorist organization that committed this pogrom. Israel goes above and beyond. I really do believe this. And the IDF have been more moral than, let's say, for example, the Allies were in Afghanistan or Iraq. When you look at how many civilians have been killed compared to how many terrorists have been killed, the ratio is the lowest, I think, in any kind of recent modern war, on top of the fact that, as well as their ratios being the lowest, on top of the fact that they're fighting an enemy that hides in hospitals and schools and under the civilian populations.
No, absolutely.
Estimated 500,000 Iraqis, civilians, died from the invasion, between the invasion in 2003 and 2006. 500,000.
Wow.
Okay.
People don't know this.
Yes, the US was accused of all sorts then as well. UK was accused of all sorts then as well. There's that debate on it. But I don't remember any calls for the US or the UK to be banned from the World Cup.
Yeah, if that was the case, England would be banned from the 2006
England,
World
Scotland,
Cup
Wales, and then who do you
Germany.
ban? England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Let's ban the lot.
Absolutely, but praise God for God's providence in the Trump administration, because Donald Trump, the US president, has a close relationship with Giuliani Infantino, who is his counterpart at FIFA, who faces pressure both from Israel's opponents and allies to pick a side in the world's most intractable conflict. A spokesman for the US State Department has said the following by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, told Sky News, "We will absolutely work to fully stop any effort to attempt to ban Israel's national soccer team from the World Cup," so which is good. But share with us, really unpack for us this awful concert that took place on Wednesday the 17th of September called Together for Palestine at Wembley Arena, where we saw that Eric Cantona spoke, but many Hollywood actors and musicians had a concert for Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, it had your usual champagne socialisty type individuals there. Benedict Cumberbatch, Florence Pugh, Riz Ahmed, they raised over 1.6 million for Palestinian-led organizations. That's pretty euphemistic, Palestinian-led organizations. What does that mean? Who is that? Who's getting this? Where's it going? How's it actually going to be used? How's it going to help? Will it help repair tunnels? Will it help, infrastructure? What are we talking about here? The 4-hour event was curated by an individual, Brian Eno and Khalid Abdallah, aiming to provide allegedly humanitarian support for Palestinians, and featured musical performances, speeches, and video messages from global celebrities. And you had notable moments. Richard Gere, Louis Theroux, and an assortment of Palestinian doctors and journalists. Now, I don't know, because frankly, this had zero interest to me apart from the news reporting.
They didn't have much news coverage.
There wasn't, but I remember seeing, obviously, people were talking about it in various outlets on social media, but I do wonder about who these doctors and journalists were and what their affiliations were, because a significant number of Palestinian doctors and journalists have proven connections and links with Hamas. And I'm talking also about the ones who are in this country, right? Who have, some of them even lost their jobs because they have threatened or made comments about or against Jews in their medical profession. Of course, Cillian Murphy and Irish and musicians such as Billie Eilish as well, in their pre-recorded video messages. It was described as significant and star-studded. It's
nauseating. It's this virtue signaling, using Israel to kind of like, look, I'm a great person because I'm against genocide, and it is nauseating. It's so pride, and it reminds me of Greta Thunberg's flotilla to Gaza, and it's all about social media. And I think in the concert, I think this is worrying. I mean, my wife and I, we say whenever an actor or celebrity comes out and says this, whoever they are, we'll blacklist that actor, we'll ban. But one of these guys, Benedict Cumberbatch, who a lot of us know from many films and series, he read a poem which said about Palestine. It says this: "She was known as Palestine. She forevermore will be known as Palestine." That is genocidal. That is eradicating Israel. She will forever be known as Palestine. And what's he on about? He's on about the land of Israel and that whole area, this Palestinian poet quoting it. And as well, another disappointing one was Eric Cantona.
No, absolutely. So I'll read his quote, which was very disturbing, knowing that he was the Manchester United legend that led Manchester United to victory for their first title, winning the Premiership in 1993. He said the following. He said, "I played for France and Manchester United. I know that international football is more than just sport. It is culture. It is political. It is a soft power. In a way that a country represents itself on a global stage, the time has come to suspend Israel from that privilege. 4 days after Russia started the war in Ukraine, FIFA and UEFA suspended Russia. Where we now, 716 days into what Amnesty International has called a genocide, and yet Israel continued to be allowed to participate. Why? Why is it double standards? FIFA and UEFA must suspend Israel. Clubs everywhere must refuse to play Israeli teams. Current players everywhere must refuse to play against Israeli teams." And that's very, very disappointing from such a football legend in the game, such as Eric Cantona.
Well, it's a lot of virtue signaling, and it's also completely devoid of any historical understanding or statistical realities. First of all, there is no such thing as a Palestinian ethnicity. There's no such thing. Palestinian actually used to mean anyone who lived in that region, Jewish, Arab, or other. It was known as Syria Palestina from the Roman days. Yes, it was meant to kind of end this idea of a Jewish state, but there was once upon a time that Palestinians were Jews, right? That's what they called them.
Because we had the Palestine Post under the British mandate.
100%.
The British called the Jews the Palestinians, and of course this is a narrative that's only been rebirthed with the former president of Egypt, Abdel Abdel Nasser, with the PLO and the Soviet Union to invent this Palestinian identity not as a means of kind of to create a national
Correct.
identity and ethnicity, but in order to destroy Israel.
And this is, and so, you know, genocide features the suppression of a particular ethnic identity with the endeavor of erasure.
Yeah.
There's no endeavor to erase anyone here.
Shouldn't we actually take this, because we see this slur made against Israel constantly, that
Right.
Israel is an apartheid state.
Oh, right.
Yeah, let's have a look at the current Israeli
Does
football
its team
you
know?
know,
Have
you
they
have-
been informed?
You have Israeli Arabs,
That's right.
and you have Jewish Israelis
Doesn't make
playing
sense.
together in the same football team.
Doesn't make
so
sense.
there is no apartheid,
Right.
there is no discrimination.
What about the Palestine football team, Simon? How many Jews are on the Palestine football team?
Well, the answer to that is no.
Any other ethnicities?
Well,
present?
firstly, the Israelis wouldn't want to play, or
No,
Jewish
I-
people want to play for the Palestinian Authority anyway. But even if they did, they certainly wouldn't be allowed anyway.
be-
so.
Yeah.
Can you, so there's total, you know, the only place, and I've made this point in that region, the only place that I've seen apartheid is in the Palestinian territories, those that are described as, you know, belonging to the Palestinian Authority.
Yeah.
If you are Jewish, if you are Israeli, you will get lynched if you go into that region.
Yep.
You know, and then also, even on the Temple Mount, Jews are not allowed after 11 a.m. You can't go on the Temple Mount if you're Jewish after 11 a.m. You can only enter through one particular gate, on one particular entrance, if you're Jewish on the Temple Mount. So, you know, the apartheid is a part of the Islamic system.
That's right. I mean, there's literally signs, no Jews past this point. And,
Yes.
you know, the football team shows and highlights just how much Israel is not apartheid. The rest of society does, their judicial system, their education system, the police. I actually had a friend of ours, a mutual friend, Brian from Miles, he spoke at our church yesterday and he was showing videos from Israel. And our people new to the church were fairly new. They were saying to me, oh, we didn't know there was black Jews. We didn't know there was Arabs living in Israel. We thought it was like, you know, apartheid. We thought this, we thought that. I said, did you know there's 2 million Arabs living in Israel with absolutely equal? People don't know this. It's
20% of
disinformation.
Israel's population as well. Do you want to unpack for us as well how Jeremy Corbyn has decided to get on this bandwagon, and other European nations are calling for Israel to be boycotted, and particularly the Israeli club teams that are going to be playing in European football competitions as well, coming up in the next couple of weeks and months?
Yeah, I mean, surprise, surprise. Jeremy Corbyn, he was, together with Aston Villa's MP, called for the club's Europa League fixture against Israeli club Maccabi Tel Aviv to be cancelled. Former Labour leader Corbyn and Ayub Khan, who form part of Parliament's so-called Independence Alliance, launched a petition demanding UEFA, the government or police, urgently stop November's game taking place, hold it behind closed doors, or move it to a neutral country. I mean, that's scary. Are we not a neutral? What are we? Are we anti-Israel? I mean, Irish club Bohemians also wrote to UEFA. President Alexander Catherine and General Secretary Theodoridis, calling for Israel's immediate suspension from European football. And the governing body has previously attempted to walk a political tightrope over the war in Gaza, something that backfired last month when it was accused of promoting the blood libel that Jews murder children by displaying "Stop Killing Children" and "Stop Killing Civilians" banner on the pitch before the Super Cup.
And of course that was Tottenham. Tottenham Hotspur were playing Paris Saint-Germain in that game in the Super Cup, because it's between the winners of the Champions League and the winners of the Europa League. And of course then we're seeing, because Tottenham is a Jewish club,
That's right.
we're seeing those anti-Semitic slurs being kind of labelled at Tottenham. But also, I mean, the Spanish Prime Minister has even gone even further, Pedro Sanchez, calling not only for Israel to be thrown out of world sport, but he's saying that if Israel qualifies for next summer's World Cup in the USA, then he could pull Spain out of the World Cup and boycott it. Now, considering that Spain are probably the favourites now to win the World Cup, they're playing a level of football that no other nation's playing. They've just won the Euros last year, Euro 2024. They are the favourites to actually win the World Cup next summer. How is that going to go down with the Spanish football population, knowing that the Prime Minister of Spain is wanting to align himself with the Islamist terrorist organisations such as Hamas, and at the expense of that would sacrifice Spain's chances of winning the World Cup?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to go down very well at all. In fact, I think a lot of this is a complete misreading of general populace. There's a lot of pressure from activists, there's a lot of pressure from Islamic football players in different places, and so they're listening to all of this. The real truth of where everyone stands would be seen if they said, right, we're boycotting this. We're not going to be a part of the World Cup. We're withdrawing. I think the cities of Spain would see riots. Unfortunately, you know, I mean, I think there would be like absolute mass upheaval. But they're only listening to one side of this. They're not interested in listening to. I mean, just look at Netanyahu's speech at the UN, and how people are not interested in a dialogue or a conversation. They're not interested in the debate. They stonewall it and just walk out. They're not interested in rationale.
And it's so like, it's so immature, isn't it? Just walking out. I mean, and not just that, but it's like if you find yourself, like the countries that boycotted Netanyahu, for example, Spain, Norway, etc. If you find yourself on the same side as Iran or Hamas or Hezbollah, or if you're cheering the Houthis on the streets, how can you not see that history will show that you, my friends, you are the ones on the wrong side of history. You are the ones who are anti-God and anti-Israel.
And the football fans of these countries are not interested in this.
Nah,
they're just interested in their team qualifying and doing well at the World Cup, and especially Spanish fans who must be thinking that they have a good chance of winning the World Cup. And have that chance thrown away because of political virtual signals are horrific. But let's have a look now and focus on Israel's response to the potential of being banned from playing in European elite football competitions in Europe, potentially also being banned from playing in the World Cup. But thankfully we know that hasn't happened. But quickly, the Times of Israel reported on Thursday the 25th of September the following headline: UEFA heading to vote next week on booting Israel out of European soccer. It says a clear majority of the governing body executive members are said to be in favour of the move, would ban the Israeli club and the national teams from competing in any European competitions. So we see here that on Thursday, Culture and Sports Minister Miki Zohar said the following, that he was working with the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the chair of the Israel Football Association to prevent the move. He says, however, that the correct step ahead of the expected vote is to act responsibly towards the professional bodies and not make statements. And we also say, for example, he's actually called out the Qataris putting pressure following Israel's strike on Hamas leaders in Doha earlier this month. So it appears as well that this huge amount of money coming from Qatar being pumped into UEFA. So let's have a look now at Benjamin Netanyahu a few years ago talking about his love for football and the hope that one day Israel and Iran could play an international football match together.
Can you imagine how hard it is to stop Ronaldo from scoring a goal? I used to play soccer. Let me tell you, it's almost impossible. But the Iranian team just did the impossible. To the Iranian people, I say, you showed courage on the playing field. And today you show the same courage in the streets of Iran. Iran has many problems: air pollution, water scarcity, billions wasted on terror. Can you imagine what would happen if the Iranian government, instead of wasting your money on Syria and Yemen and unnecessary wars in the Middle East, would start investing it in solving these problems in Iran? The solution to all these problems is the Iranian people. That's why I offered medical aid to save Iranian lives after a devastating earthquake. That's why I opened a Farsi Telegram group to teach water conservation to Iranian farmers. And that's why I'll never stop advocating for peace with the Iranian people. One day I'll hope to watch Iran's soccer team go head-to-head against Israel in a free Tehran. On that day, we'll all be winners.
Yeah, well, there you have from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And look, Simon, I'm looking at this. I was thinking when we saw all of the news last week coming out, I thought, they won't dare. they're not going to. But then as things drug on, there were moments where I thought, no, actually, it seems like so many nations are against Israel's participation in this. And really, what you've already said, I do think the Trump administration on this occasion, the U.S. is hosting this World Cup, right? The Americas are hosting it. And so they're saying, hold on,
isn't this God's providence? Because if the World Cup was held in any other nation, they couldn't put pressure on the delegates, they couldn't put pressure on FIFA, they couldn't put pressure on UEFA to actually accept Israel, which was excellent. So this is the kind of statement now, because of the pressure from the Trump administration is actually placed upon UEFA. The Times of Israel has now reported on Monday the 29th of September, UEFA said to reassure Israel no plans to boot the country out from the Soccer Federation over Gaza. The European soccer governing body has sent a message to the Israel Football Association reassuring them there is no plans to hold a meeting this week to consider banning Israel over the war in Gaza Strip, Ynet reports. The unsourced report comes days after multiple reports that the Union of European Football Associations, of which Israel is a member, is set to decide on a vote this week to suspend Israel from international organisations playing football. So share with us your thoughts within 30 seconds, Tim, about how this is good news. But again, it's the intent behind these nations to banish Israel from playing international football, particularly in next summer's World Cup in USA.
Absolutely, you hit the nail on the head there. There is this intent, but God's providence, you know, and the fact that it's in America and Donald Trump is, I believe, God's man at this hour.
Amen. So Tim and Reagan, thank you so much for a great programme. Have a great time in Israel next week as being part of the Feast Chaplains for ICJ UK. Yeah. And I want to thank you all for watching this programme. We've got to continue to pray and support Israel. So if you know that there is an Israeli club team playing either a Premier League team in a European competition in this country, please go and visit them, please support them, and also support the national team as we see that the nations around the world are gathering against Israel, and this football is the latest weapon being used to target the only Jewish state in the world. But we know that Israel is the apple of God's eye. He who touches Israel touches the Lord. So this is a very dangerous thing for the nations to engage in. So continue to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and thank you for watching this week's Behind the Headlines.